The night was endless, and the cold was merciless. Snow fell like white knives cutting through the air, each flake sharp and heavy as if it carried the weight of the whole frozen world. The land was covered in silence, broken only by the whistling wind and the soft, weak cries of a small child. In the middle of that wasteland, an alien woman stumbled forward, her feet dragging through the thick snow, her body trembling with every step. She clutched a bundle close to her chest, holding her child tightly, pressing him against her body as if her warmth alone could keep him alive. Her skin was pale from the frost, her breath short and painful. She was exhausted, starving, and on the edge of collapse, yet she kept moving because the child in her arms was still alive, still breathing, and she could not let go. Her vision blurred as the storm grew harsher. She had walked for hours with no end in sight, no shelter, no food, no hope. Every time the child whimpered, she whispered soft words, trying to calm him, though her own lips were blue from the cold. "It's all right, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm here. I won't leave you." But inside her heart, she feared the truth. She could not protect him forever. The snowstorm howled like a beast, and the night pressed down on her like a heavy shadow. She looked up at the sky, but there were no stars, only darkness and swirling white death falling endlessly from above. Her legs finally gave way, and she fell to her knees. The impact jolted her body, but she tightened her hold on her baby, protecting him from the ground. She tried to rise again, but her strength had abandoned her. Her hands shook violently, her body numb. She could no longer feel her own fingers, only the faint warmth of the tiny life pressed against her chest. Tears rolled down her frozen cheeks, but they froze instantly into small crystals before they could even fall. She thought of her people, of the life she once had, but all of it seemed so far away now. She had been abandoned, left to survive on her own. No one cared. No one was coming. The child cried again, softer this time, weaker, and the sound cut into her soul like a blade. She leaned down, pressing her face against him, trying to give him what little warmth she had left. Her body curled around him, forming a shield, as the storm raged on. She whispered, "Sleep, my child. I'll keep you safe, even if it's the last thing I do." Her voice was faint, carried away by the wind. The weight of the cold pressed harder against her body, her eyelids growing heavy. She knew the end was near. Death was no longer a distant fear. It was here, wrapping around her like the snow itself. Still, she held her baby tighter, willing to give her last breath if it meant he would live a moment longer. The storm screamed, but in her fading mind, it began to sound quiet, almost gentle, like a lullaby calling her to rest. She closed her eyes, ready to surrender, her body trembling for the last time. She thought this was the end. She thought she and her child would be found frozen together, another forgotten story buried under snow. But then something strange happened. She felt it. Not the cold, not the wind, something else. Warmth. Her eyes opened slowly, confused. At first, she thought it was a dream, a final trick of her dying mind. But no, it was real. Strong arms were lifting her, wrapping around her, pulling her and her baby close. She felt heat against her frozen skin, a heartbeat strong and steady pressing against her body. Her eyes widened, and through the blur of tears and frost, she saw him. The figure, tall, broad, human. His face was scarred, his eyes sharp but filled with something she had not seen in a long time, determination. The human did not speak at first. He only adjusted his grip, pulling the child closer against his chest while holding her firmly. His body was warm, almost burning compared to the icy night. She tried to speak, but her lips could only tremble. Her mind screamed questions. Who was he? Why was he here? Why was he saving her? She had been sure no one would come. She had been sure she was alone. The human bent his head close, his voice deep but steady, cutting through the storm. "You're not dying here," he said. His words were short, but they carried weight, like an unbreakable promise. He pulled a heavy cloak from his back and wrapped it around her and the baby, shielding them from the snow. Then he held them tighter and began moving through the storm, his steps strong and certain as if the cold meant nothing to him. The alien mother's mind was spinning. Who was this man? A wanderer? A soldier? A ghost of the frozen wasteland? She did not know. All she knew was that she had been waiting for death, and instead, she had been found. The storm still howled, but for the first time, she felt warmth spreading into her frozen body, and in that warmth, a small spark of hope was reborn. The cave was dark, but compared to the storm outside, it felt like a sanctuary. The human guided the alien mother and her child inside, his broad shoulders shielding them until they were safe from the wind. At the center of the cave burned a small fire, its light flickering against the stone walls, sending shadows dancing across the uneven surfaces. The warmth spread slowly, filling the air, pushing away the biting cold. The alien mother's body trembled as she adjusted to the sudden change. She clutched her baby tightly, watching as the man laid down his heavy cloak around them. His movements were rough, simple but filled with purpose, like a man who had done this many times before. He crouched near the fire, adding more wood to keep the flames alive, the crackling sound echoing softly in the cave. The mother kept her eyes on him, her body tense even as exhaustion pulled at her. Who was he? Why was he here in such a frozen wasteland? He had saved her, yes, but fear still lingered in her heart. She had been betrayed before, left alone by her own people when she had become a burden. Could she trust this stranger? Her hands shook as she rocked her child, who was finally breathing easier in the warmth. The baby whimpered softly, then fell into a shallow sleep, his small chest rising and falling against her. She felt relief wash through her, but it was mixed with uncertainty. The man turned his head, his eyes catching hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched heavy between them, broken only by the popping of the firewood and the distant howl of the storm outside. Finally, his voice came, deep, quiet but steady. Eat. He pushed a small package toward her, something wrapped in cloth. Her fingers hesitated before unwrapping it. Inside was a piece of dried meat and a small crust of bread. It was little, far too little for three, but to her it looked like a feast. She looked back at him, confused. He had given it all to her and the child. He himself had nothing left in his hands. You not eat? She asked, her words weak, her voice breaking from the cold. The man did not answer immediately. He sat back near the fire, his arms resting on his knees, staring into the flames. His face was hard, his jaw sharp, but his eyes were distant, carrying something heavy inside. Finally, he said, I'll manage. The little one needs it more. Her heart tightened. She looked at her baby, then at him. He was a stranger, a human, yet he gave without asking. She broke the bread in half and pushed part of it toward him. Share, she whispered. At first, he shook his head, refusing, but when she insisted, placing the food closer to him, he finally took it. He ate silently, his movements slow and controlled, like a man used to hunger. The mother studied him carefully. His clothes were worn, patched many times over. His boots carried the marks of long journeys. A blade hung at his side, scratched and weathered from use. His hands were strong, but covered in scars. He was not a man of comfort. He was a man who had walked through storms long before this night. She wanted to ask more questions, but fear held her back. Instead, she focused on feeding her child tiny pieces of the dried meat, watching as color slowly returned to his cheeks. The child's breathing grew steadier, his little hands curling around her fingers. For the first time in many days, she felt her son might live through another night. When she finally looked up again, she found the man still staring into the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. He seemed far away, trapped in memories she could not see. His silence was heavy, but not cruel. It was the silence of someone carrying burdens too deep to speak easily. She wanted to ask who he was, why he was alone, why he had saved her. But something in his face told her the answers would not come tonight. The storm raged outside, the sound of the wind screaming against the cave walls, but inside the fire gave them a fragile peace. Slowly, the mother felt her fear begin to soften. She saw the way he kept glancing at the child, making sure he was safe. She saw how his body remained tense, always listening for danger, ready to protect. This was not a man who saved others by accident. This was a man who had chosen to step into the storm for them. Hours passed. The fire crackled on. The mother drifted between sleep and wakefulness, her body exhausted. Each time her eyes closed, she feared she might never open them again. Yet every time she stirred, the man was still there, sitting steady, his eyes scanning the cave, watching over them. She realized he was not sleeping at all. He was keeping guard. The thought made her chest tighten. No one had watched over her since she was abandoned. No one had cared if she lived or died. Yet here was this human, a stranger, protecting her and her child as if it was the most natural thing in the world. At last, as the fire dimmed, she whispered the question she could no longer hold inside. "Why help me?" Her voice was low, almost lost to the crackle of the flames. For a long moment he said nothing, and she thought he would remain silent. But then, his voice came, quiet and firm. "Because no one should die in the cold." She stared at him, stunned by the simplicity of his words. There was no grand reason, no demand for reward, no hidden motive. Just a truth spoken from a man who had seen too much. She wanted to ask more, but her body gave in, pulling her into a heavy sleep. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the human sitting by the fire, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade, his eyes unblinking as he kept watch. And so, through the storm, a fragile bond was born, between a broken mother, her fragile child, and the human stranger whose warmth had already begun to change everything. The storm did not end with the dawn. Outside the cave, the frozen wind still roared like a wild beast, tearing across the land, filling the air with endless white. Inside, the small fire had burned low, its light flickering weakly against the stone walls. The warmth it gave was fragile, like a candle fighting against the darkness, and both the alien mother and her child huddled closer to it as the cold tried to creep back in. The child stirred softly in his sleep, his tiny breaths visible in the air, but at least his face no longer carried the pale stillness of death. The mother looked down at him, her heart aching with both love and fear. He was alive, but for how long? Food was gone, firewood was running low, and the storm showed no mercy. The human stood near the entrance of the cave. His eyes narrowed as he studied the white void beyond. His posture was tense, his shoulders rigid, and his hand rested near the hilt of his blade as if danger might step out of the storm at any moment. His face was grim, carved with lines of experience, and his breath came in steady clouds. The mother watched him quietly, wondering what thoughts moved behind those hardened eyes. He had given her warmth, shelter, and food, but how long could he protect them in this endless cold? At last he turned to her. "Stay here. Keep the fire alive," he said. His voice was low, steady, without hesitation. She blinked, her heart tightening at his words. "Where you go?" she asked, her voice weak. He pulled on his heavy cloak, fastening it across his chest. "Wood. Food. If I don't, the fire dies. Then you die too." Her breath caught. He spoke the truth plainly, as if he was not afraid for himself at all, only for them. She wanted to protest, to tell him not to risk his life, but the words would not form. Instead, she simply nodded, her fingers clutching her child tighter. She watched as he stepped out into the storm, his figure swallowed almost instantly by the wall of white. For a moment, fear gripped her heart. What if he never came back? What if he froze out there, or worse, something found him in the snow? The hours dragged slowly. The mother sat near the fire, feeding small twigs and scraps into the flames, keeping them alive while whispering to her child. Each sound of the wind outside made her jump, Each crackle of the fire reminded her how fragile their safety was. Time lost meaning. She did not know if minutes or hours had passed when finally, she heard something. Footsteps crunching in the snow. Her head snapped toward the cave's entrance, her heart pounding. Then, through the curtain of white, the man appeared again. But he was not unscathed. His cloak was torn. His arm carried a deep slash that bled slowly, staining the snow behind him. He dragged a bundle of branches across the ground, and in his other hand, he held the limp body of a strange animal, furred, long-limbed, with sharp teeth. The mother gasped softly, covering her child's eyes as the human dropped the beast near the fire. He grunted, tossing the wood down with the other hand before finally sinking to one knee, his breath heavy. "What happened?" she whispered, fear rising in her chest. He wiped blood from his arm with the back of his hand, his eyes steady despite the wound. "They hunt in packs," he said simply. "I killed one. The others ran." His voice was calm, as if it was nothing, as if fighting predators in a blizzard was only a small inconvenience. But she saw the truth in his body. He was in pain, every movement strained. Yet he did not complain, did not falter. Without hesitation, she moved toward him, tearing a strip from her own clothing. She pressed it against the wound, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. He watched her quietly, not resisting, though his jaw tightened against the pain. Her eyes filled with tears as she worked. "You risk life for us," she whispered. He finally spoke, his tone low but certain. "A life means nothing if it's only mine. But if I keep you and the child alive, then maybe it means something again." Her hands stilled at his words. She looked up at him, truly seeing him for the first time. His face, scarred and hardened by struggle, carried more than survival. It carried loss, pain, and something she could not yet name. She realized then that he was not just saving them out of duty or chance. There was something deeper, something he had lost that he was now trying to protect in them. As she bound his wound, he reached for the beast he had killed, cutting into its flesh with practiced skill. Soon the smell of roasting meat filled the cave, and the child stirred, drawn by the scent of food. The mother fed him tiny pieces, watching his strength return little by little. The human ate sparingly, as always giving more to them. The warmth of the fire grew stronger with the added wood, and the cave became a fragile island of life in a sea of death. That night, when the storm still howled and the wind screamed, the three of them sat close together by the fire. The child slept peacefully between them, his small breaths soft and steady. The mother looked at the man, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. "You saved us again." He shook his head. "No, just surviving. That's all." But she saw the truth. This was more than survival. This was sacrifice. As she closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under, one thought filled her heart. She was no longer waiting for death. She was fighting for life again because this stranger, this human, had given her the strength to believe that survival was still possible. The storm had finally begun to ease, though the land outside was still wrapped in ice and silence. In the cave, the fire burned stronger now, casting warm light that softened the shadows on the stone walls. The mother sat close to the flames, holding her child against her chest, his tiny body wrapped in the heavy cloak the man had given them. The child slept soundly, his breathing steady, and for the first time in many nights she felt some measure of peace. Across from her, the human sat in silence, sharpening his blade with slow, deliberate strokes. His face was focused, his eyes fixed on the weapon. Yet there was something heavy in the air around him, something unsaid. She watched him carefully, her heart caught between fear and curiosity. Who was this man? Why was he out here alone, fighting storms and predators, with nothing but a blade and a few scraps of food? The more she looked at him, the more she felt the weight of secrets pressing against the silence. She wanted to understand him, but she also feared what the truth might reveal. Still, the storm outside had left them no choice but to share the same fire, and the fire's light seemed to push words into the open. At last, she broke the silence. Her voice was soft, hesitant, almost afraid of his answer. "Why are you here? Alone?" The man paused, his hand tightening slightly on the blade. For a moment he said nothing, and she thought he would ignore her. But then, slowly, he placed the weapon aside and leaned back against the cave wall. His eyes lifted from the fire to meet hers, and she saw something in them she had not expected, pain, raw and unhidden. "I wasn't always alone," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Once I had a family, a wife, a daughter, a home that was warm and full of laughter." His words carried a strange rhythm, like a man reciting memories he had tried to bury. The mother's chest tightened as she listened, her arms holding her child closer. "What happened?" she asked softly. His gaze shifted back to the fire, as if the flames themselves could carry the story for him. "War," he said simply. "Not this frozen wasteland. Another place. Another battle. I was a soldier. I fought to protect my people, to push back enemies who wanted to take everything from us. I thought I was doing the right thing. But while I fought far away, my family was left behind. The enemy struck our home, and by the time I returned, it was gone. They were gone." The fire crackled loudly in the silence that followed, filling the space where his words had left a wound open. The mother felt tears well in her eyes. She looked at the man, the stranger, the savior, and for the first time she saw not just strength but a broken soul, a man carrying grief like a weight heavier than the snow outside. She whispered, "I'm sorry." He gave a small shake of his head. "Don't be. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead. I tried to fight. I tried to save them. I failed. Since then, I've walked alone. I came here because there was nothing left for me anywhere else. Out here, I thought, maybe the cold would finish what war started. I was ready to die in the snow, just another nameless body buried by the wind. But then..." His eyes shifted to her and the child, his voice softer now. "Then I found you, and for the first time in years, I felt like maybe my life wasn't over. Like maybe saving someone else could give meaning again." The mother's breath caught. She had never expected such words. She looked down at her child, then back at him, and the truth struck her. He had found purpose in them, just as she had found salvation in him. Their pain was different but born from the same root. Loss, abandonment, the cruel indifference of the world. Yet here, in this fragile shelter, they had discovered each other. Her hands trembled as she reached out, placing them gently over his wounded arm where she had tied the cloth earlier. "You're not the only one who lost," she whispered. "My people, they cast me aside because I carried a child during the war. They said I was weak, a burden, that my child would hold back their survival. They left me in the snow, told me to fend for myself. I wandered, hoping to find a place, but there was none. Only death followed me until you came." His eyes widened slightly as he listened. Her voice shook, filled with both pain and defiance. "They said I was weak, but I held on. For him, for my son. Even when I thought I would die, I could not let him go. And now, you gave me something I had lost long ago. Hope." The man's chest rose and fell heavily. He stared at her for a long moment, and then, for the first time since she had met him, he gave a faint smile. It was small, broken, but real. "Then maybe," he said softly, "we're not so different after all." The cave grew quiet again, but this time it was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two souls who had shared their deepest scars and found recognition in each other's pain. The fire burned stronger between them, and though the storm still howled outside, neither felt as cold as before. The child stirred in his sleep, letting out a soft sound, and the mother soothed him gently. The man watched them, his eyes steady, his heart conflicted. He had sworn to himself long ago that he would never feel again, never open his heart to loss. But now, sitting with them, he felt the walls inside him beginning to crack. The night passed slowly, but the bond between them grew stronger with every flicker of the fire. Both had lost everything, yet together they had found something new, a fragile connection, born in the heart of a frozen storm. And though the world outside was still cruel and merciless, inside that cave hope had returned, hidden in the warmth of 3 lives bound by survival and truth. The storm finally began to break. After what felt like endless nights of darkness and howling winds, the white curtain outside the cave grew thinner, and a faint light touched the frozen horizon. The snow still covered the land like a heavy blanket, but the wind was calmer now, carrying silence instead of violence. For the first time in many days, the alien mother stepped outside the cave with her child in her arms, the human following close behind. The cold still stung her cheeks, but it no longer felt like death pressing against her. It felt like a challenge she could face. The sky above was pale, touched with soft colors of dawn, as if the world itself was waking again. The mother looked out at the wide expanse of white stretching endlessly before her, her heart both fearful and hopeful. She had thought she would never see another sunrise, never hear her child breathe, never feel the warmth of life again. Yet here she stood, alive, her child pressing his face against her chest, sighing softly in sleep. She turned to the man beside her, and in that moment, she realized she did not stand alone anymore. The human adjusted the strap on his shoulder, where he carried the remaining supplies. His face was calm, his eyes sharp as he studied the distance. He seemed like a man always ready for danger, yet there was a quiet determination in the way he stood, as if nothing could turn him back now. The mother could see the scars on his skin, the weight he carried, but also the fire in his eyes that had kept them alive through the storm. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You gave us life again." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he gave a small nod, his voice steady. "You gave me life too." The words were simple, but she felt their truth. He had been walking into the storm to die, but finding her and the child had given him something worth protecting again. Together, they had pulled each other back from the edge of death. The journey forward was not easy. The snow was deep, each step heavy, but the man led them carefully, choosing paths where the wind had thinned the ice and the snow was not as high. The mother followed, her child wrapped tightly in the cloak against her chest. Each step was a reminder that survival was no longer just about enduring the cold but about moving towards something new, something beyond the storm. At times, the child stirred, his small cries breaking the silence of the frozen land. Each sound pulled at her heart, but she saw how the man would pause, glancing back, his hand ready to help, his eyes softening for just a moment before returning to their watchful sharpness. It was in these small moments that she began to see him not only as a protector but as something more, someone who had chosen to be part of their fragile family. By midday, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting light over the snow. The land glittered like a sea of diamonds, blinding and beautiful. The mother stopped, gazing at it with tears in her eyes. She had thought she would never see beauty again, only darkness and death. But here it was, the world, still alive, still capable of wonder. She looked at her child, who blinked up at the light with wide, innocent eyes, and she felt a surge of hope so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. They pressed on until they reached a ridge where the snow thinned and the land opened before them. From the top, they could see far into the distance, where the outlines of forests broke the white emptiness, and beyond that, smoke rising faintly from what might be a village or settlement. The mother's breath caught in her throat. "There, people," she whispered. The man stood beside her, his eyes narrowing as he studied the distant shapes. He gave a short nod. Shelter, food, maybe safety. His tone was cautious, but there was no hiding the truth. They had found a direction, a goal beyond survival. It was no longer just about living through another night. It was about building a future. The child laughed suddenly, a small sound, pure and warm in the frozen air. Both adults turned, and for a moment, the pain of their past seemed to fall away. The mother pressed her forehead against her son's, her tears glistening in the sunlight. "You will live," she whispered. "You will see more than storms. You will know warmth." The man watched them quietly, his face unreadable, but inside his chest something shifted. He had thought his heart was frozen forever, locked in grief. Yet watching this fragile alien woman hold her child with such fierce love, he felt warmth stirring inside him too. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that life could still hold meaning, that he could still walk forward not as a man waiting to die but as someone needed, someone trusted. Together they descended from the ridge, their footprints marking the snow behind them. The mother carried her child close, and the man walked beside her, steady and strong, his shadow falling long across the white. The land was still cold, still dangerous, but the storm no longer ruled them. They had faced death and found each other in its jaws. Now they walked toward something new. As the sun rose higher, painting the world in light, the mother glanced at the man and whispered words she had carried in her heart since that first night. "You gave me back hope." He did not answer with words, only with a faint smile as he adjusted the child's weight when she grew tired. His actions spoke louder than anything he could say. And so, in the frozen land where despair had once claimed them both, 3 lives walked together into the dawn. The storm had not destroyed them. Instead, it had forged them into something stronger. A family bound not by blood but by survival, sacrifice, and the simple power of human warmth. Sparkle's word count, 920.